Today I want to do my first core idea video deep dive, I should say, my first core idea deep dive, and the topic I want to do it on is time management. So my goal here is to give a brief summary of my thinking about time management. And what that's going to consist of is, let me define for you what I mean by time management. Let me give you the three principles in my writing and on this podcast we always talk about that any good time management system should probably satisfy. And then I will briefly talk through my particular system, which we can think of as one example of a time management system that satisfies these principles. You can do something else, but so you see what a real fully fledged time management system that satisfies these principles look like. And then I'm going to have a bonus fourth principle I want to talk about that debatably is not really about time management. It lives right outside time management, but it's related. So I'm going to talk about that briefly at the end. So that's my agenda for this core idea discussion on time management. So let's start. What do I mean by time management? For me, at least in the context of this discussion, I'm thinking about work, the time management in work. The way you deal with your time outside of work is a little bit different, so I'm going to put that aside. And in the context of work, I'm going to define time management to be whatever philosophy, process, systems, or rules that you deploy to make decisions about what you're going to do right now with your time. How do you figure out it's 12:26 on a Friday, what do I do next? In the end, that's what a time management system is, the way to help you answer that question in as useful a manner as possible. Now, everyone who works has some sort of time management system they're using. If you don't know what it's called, if you can't tell me the details of it, if you've never thought about that, it's just a really bad one probably. But you still have one. One way or the other, you're making these decisions. The question is just, how do we want to make these decisions? What is going to work better? So I'm going to give you the three properties I think any good time management system should have. I love alliteration. Longtime listeners to the podcast know this. I love C's in my alliteration, as longtime listeners of this podcast know. So I named the three key properties here with three C's: capture, configure, control. Let's talk about these each briefly in the abstract, and I'll tell you about my system that satisfies these. Number one, capture. I believe a good professional time management system needs to have some place in which you store all the information that's important to making decisions about what you need to be doing and what you should be doing. That is trusted. It's a place that you are going to look at. Things that go in there will not be forgotten. These ideas get out of your head and into a system so you're not wasting brain cycles on trying to remember or keep fresh stuff that you need to do. Now, in the context of tasks, we can give credit to this idea to David Allen. So David Allen, in his seminal post-computer time management book, and I mean that very specifically because, as I've written about before, time management goes through big evolution. So post-computers, computer networks, and email time management went through a big revolution. David Allen was there at the beginning. He had this idea of full capture, where he said all of your tasks should be in a trusted system that you review regularly, not in your head. He actually adapted that idea from a previous business thinker named Dean Acheson, unrelated to President Truman, Secretary of State, same name, different person, who had first developed, I believe, in the 1970s, this notion of full capture, and David Allen expanded it. So that's really the core of this. David Allen's articulation of full capture said, don't waste mental energy remembering things. Have it in a system so your brain can be clear to actually focus on working. This also reduces a lot of stress because your brain gets stressed when it's worried about forgetting things you need to do. I generalize capture, though, beyond what Allen talks about. In addition to each of your commitments being somewhere you trust, I want your plans to also be somewhere you trust. So any thinking you've done about what you're working on all sorts of different time scales, that should be written down somewhere you trust and review regularly as well. I think that's often overlooked, but the planning process of what's going on, how do I want to get my work done, what needs to be done this semester, what do I have to get done this week to hit this goal, that's a really important part of time management. I don't want that all in your head. That also gets captured. All right, second property, configure. All right, this is a twist that I've become increasingly a loud advocate for, which is care more about how you actually organize this information that you're capturing. I think you really need to think through, once I have this information written down somewhere, where do I put it? How do I organize it? Is it in categories? Is it broken up by role? Equally important, getting the relevant information consolidated. I'm really big on this. So not only do you have a really smart organization for all the stuff on your plate, you're also gathering in one place all the relevant information. You're not searching through your email inbox to try to remember, what does this mean and where are we and what do I owe this person? I'm supposed to get back to Derek about the program codes. What does that mean when we go through my inbox? So all that should be in one place. These are our two goals with organize. A, that the information is organized well, where what you want to happen here, what you want to have happen here is that you can very quickly get the gestalt of what's on your plate, what's due, what's not, who you're waiting to hear back from. The information is put aside in such a way that it's not just a list with 100 things. And two, all the relevant information is there. Not scrambling around to figure out what I need to know to do this thing. All the information is there. All right, control. The third property of a good time management system. Control says, instead of being reactive in your decisions about what you want to do with your time, and by reactive I mean just saying, okay, it's 12:23 on Friday. What do I want to do next? I don't know. Let me see what seems relevant. Let me look at my inbox. Let me look at Slack. Maybe I'll look at a to-do list and try to choose something off of it. Control says, don't be reactive. Don't wait till you get to the moment to say, what should I do next? Instead, be proactive. Make a plan for your time in advance that makes the most of the time that you actually have available. So you think ahead, you look at the time you have available, and you say, what do I want to do with this? Planning the whole picture at once. I'm not waiting till the moment to say what happens next. Now, on the podcast, I talk often about doing this control at multiple time scales. You'll hear me talk about multi-scale planning. This is where that actually applies. And what I recommend is that you should be doing this type of planning on 3 time scales: quarterly, weekly, daily. The quarterly, you have a plan for what you want to try to get done that quarter. What's important? What are the big projects you're working on? There could even be daily work that you want to really emphasize. Like, look, I got to get my cold calls up. So every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I spend the first hour doing cold calls, whatever it is, but you're making this plan for the quarter. Looking ahead at the quarter, if it's a busy quarter, not a big quarter, what are the big deadlines this quarter? Is there a huge trade fair halfway through it? That means the first half of the quarter has to be really focused on preparing for that trade fair. You're looking at the whole picture of the quarter and at this pretty big granularity, coming up with a plan. Every week, you then look at that quarterly plan and produce a plan for the week ahead of you. Now you're doing weekly planning. And when you're doing weekly planning, what you really want to do is get a sense of what's going to happen which day. And then finally, you get down to the daily scale, where you say, what am I actually doing during the hours of the day? So where in weekly planning, you were looking at what am I going to do the different days of this week. At daily planning, you're saying, here's my day. I have a meeting here, I have a call here, I have 2 meetings here. Here's the time that's free. What do I want to do during that time? So multi-scale planning, I think, is the right way to think about control. Your time, a job, as opposed to asking in the moment, what should I do next? All right, so I think any good time management system should do capture, configure, control. Well, let me talk briefly about my specific instantiation of these properties, what my time management system looks like at the moment. So for capture, there is where I actually store the things I need to do. And I use Trello, which is a task board software system. So it gives you a visual metaphor for cards on a board arranged vertically in columns. I use Trello keep track of tasks and commitments, and I use Google Docs to keep track of plans, the plans I have about various things. Trello is where all my tasks are. Google Docs are where my plans live. So that's where in multi-scale planning my quarterly plan lives. That's where other plans live. Jesse and I, for example, have a Google Doc where we have our plans for the podcast, etc. Trello for tasks, Google Docs for plans. In addition to the storage systems, you have to have the capture tool. So the tools you use to capture things during the day on the fly will then get later moved into the storage systems. Now, for me, I use two main ones. My time block planner, I am in a lucky situation, right? Was able to design and publish my own planner. So you can obviously find out more about that at timeblockplanner.com. But that planner has, for every day, a page which you can capture stuff. I capture stuff right in that planner. On my computer, I also have a text file on my desktop. I call it workingmemory.txt because I think of it as like an expansion of my actual working memory. And I use that when I'm on my computer to capture things, especially when I'm cleaning out my email. I can just type much faster than I can write. I can capture all sorts of notes in this document. I work through ideas on the document. It really is like an extension of my working memory. So a lot gets captured there. If I'm in a meeting on Zoom, things are popping up I have to do. I'm writing it probably right there in that workingmemory.txt. At the end of every day, I do a shutdown. My planner even has a box I check that says shutdown complete that indicates I've done my shutdown. As part of that shutdown process, I look through everything in that planner, everything in workingmemory.txt. I get it into one of those more stable systems. Goes on the Trello or I update my Google Doc. So those things get pushed back down to zero. They're temporary tools to capture, and they get moved to the more stable systems. The one addendum I should add there is the calendar. Obviously, some of these things are appointments, so that goes right to the calendar. All right, configure. I mentioned I use Trello for my tasks. The way I actually use Trello is I have a separate board for each of my different professional roles. I keep a separate board as a writer, a separate board, for example, as a teacher, which I keep as a separate board as a researcher, etc. Those are then split up into columns. There's a few standard columns that every one of these boards have. I typically have a column where I put tasks on there that's called to be processed. It's a pretty complicated thing I need to do, and I don't quite understand all the details of it, but I don't want to keep track of it in my head. But also, it's 5 o'clock and I'm shutting down. I don't have time to spend 20 minutes figuring out what does this mean? Like, what are the actual actions here? So I'll just throw that in the to be processed column. I usually have a column on each of these boards for waiting to hear back from. If I've sent someone a note and I need information from them, and that information is critical for me to keep making progress, I like to put a card on my Trello board under waiting to hear back that says, here's what I'm waiting to hear back from, and here's what I'm going to do once I get that information. I don't want to remember that in my head. I put it on there. I typically have a column for things I'm working on this week. I'll typically have a column for if there's specifically persistent initiatives within that role. I'll give it its own column so I can really quickly see for this thing I'm working on, what are all the different things that need to be done. So as a researcher, there might be a column for a paper we're preparing for publication. In my administrative role at Georgetown, there might be a column for a search committee that I'm on. Here's the relevant tasks. The time that I really get into and clean this up and look at it and move things around and check in on it is when I do my weekly planning. So once a week, as part of my commitment to configure, I really go through these systems and I update it. Once a week, when I'm building my weekly plan, is also when I'm reviewing the Google Docs that capture these other types of plans that are going on and update them and remind myself what's on them. So the weekly scale is when I'm really getting my hands dirty. Throughout the week, I'm just throwing stuff into here at the end of each day, but each week I really go in and clean things up. All right, finally is control. I already talked about multi-scale planning. I think is the best way to do control. You could do it other ways, but I do, for me, it's semester instead of quarterly, but semester, weekly, daily planning. Semester plans in a Google Doc. Weekly plan, I actually type it up in a text document and print it out. and I keep it with me in the back of my time block planner. So that's how, and then I'll update it and reprint it as I need to throughout the week. And then for my daily plan on time blocking, like I talked about, here's my day. Let me block off everything on my calendar. Here's the time that remains. What do I want to do during that time? Let me look at my weekly plan to remind myself of what my big picture plan is for this day. And then I'm blocking off actual hours of time and saying, here's what I'm doing here. Here's what I'm doing there. And I fill in all that information. I do that right in my time block planner, but you can do this in any type of notebook. There's a whole video at my site, timeblockplanner.com, that walks through the details of how time blocking works. So that is how I do the daily piece. You put those all together, there's my commitment to control. All right, so stepping back, capture, configure, control. If you do those three things, you're going to be making smart decisions about what you want to be doing with your time professionally. Now, I know structure